Welcome to Game Week Rankings, where I come back and I rank the matches throughout the weekend or weekdays and give each team a rating. We're going to go through each team, each result, and what I expected from them versus what they delivered. This is going to be accompanied by Game Week predictions, which I didn't manage for Game Week 1, but we will do going forwards. As you can see, I've just come back from work, so I've been trying to make time to make consistent videos. So leave a like if you enjoy these types of videos. So we will start off with Liverpool. And I've also worked on some transitions, so hopefully this works out quite well. And we'll look at their results. So Liverpool won 4-2, opening game of the weekend as inaugural champions. And they looked like they were doing quite well. They were very comfortable. They went ahead. They were 2-0 up. But much like the Community Shield, and a lot of the commentary has been centered around this, it seems like they're very weak at the back, and it seems like their defense is letting them down. It looks like their signings are working. Wirtz got himself a assist. Ekitike bagging the first goal, his second goal that we've seen him produce in sort of more popular games, so the Community Shield and this one. But I think it must be said that their defense and Van Dijk specifically looks a bit slow this season. Overall, I gave Liverpool a 7 out of 10. Solid win, room to improve. The transfer window isn't closed. We'll move on and talk about their opponents, Bournemouth, who scored 2 goals, did lose, but I would say Semenyo had a good outing, having signed a new 5-year contract. Indicates that Bournemouth look like they're still a strong team in the Premier League. I expect them to, like I predicted, be in the upper mid-table battle. So moving on to this, we'll be discussing the very, very exciting 0-0 draw between Aston Villa and Newcastle. So both of these teams would be vying for the 5th to 6th spots, I think. They had very different ends to the season, with one clinching Champions League and one clinching Europa League, or losing Champions League on the final day. I would say this transfer window has been a little bit erratic for both. Very disappointing for Newcastle with the ongoing Isak saga. But we're going to talk about Villa. What's been important for Villa is stability. They've managed to keep the majority of their signings. And I would say the Europa League is probably where they're going to put most of their focus. It seems like it's a little bit of a cheat code for Premier League teams trying to get into the Champions League. Given that they haven't added to their squad depth and how Europe seems to decimate teams, especially towards the latter stages of European competitions, I think Villa are going to struggle this season to fight on both fronts. I expected them to be high mid-table to lower mid-table, but I think that they will do quite well in Europe. On the flip side, Newcastle have had an awful transfer window. And let's just... I did make these transitions, so I do want to use them. So let's move on to talk about Newcastle. Now, the positives, I suppose, let's start there. There were some positives. Gordon and Elanga, both very quick. Harvey Barnes, also very quick. Their wingers, actually, as opposed to a lot of Premier League teams who have winger problems, looking at you, Arsenal, and we'll talk about that. It looks like Newcastle don't have any problems in the winger department. They do however, have massive problems in the striker department, and that was seen here. They have a lot of chances created, but not a lot of finishing, and their finisher, Isak, looks like he might be going out the door. I think, and I might probably make a separate video on this, that ultimately you just need to resolve the issue. I personally would say let the player go. He doesn't want to play for your team, and he's at the peak of his value. But I'm not a Newcastle supporter, so maybe take what I say with a grain of salt. Moving on to the other extremely exciting game between Brighton and Fulham. So Brighton have had and continue to have a very expansive transfer window every season, it seems. They identify some talent, they buy them in relatively cheap, although expensive for where they're getting them from, and then they flip them from a profit. Now, what's important here is I would say that it doesn't look like they've reinforced very heavily. They've got Mitoma, which is very important on his day, a great dribbler. But I must say, I didn't get a lot from this match. This seems to be a mid-table battle. I expect Brighton to finish higher than Fulham, but again, a good game nonetheless. Moving on, talking about Fulham. Now, they kind of had they petered out towards the end of last season, and I think they would be hoping to perhaps change their ways this season. However, given I didn't see them do much in the transfer window, I don't really feel like they were going to see too much coming out from Fulham, and I expect them to be comfortably mid-table, fairly well managed, fairly well coached, and a solid team, but I don't expect them to really move the needle either way. Perhaps a transitional season. Moving to one of the biggest upsets of the weekend, let's talk about Sunderland. Now, if you saw my predictions, I tipped Sunderland as a team who may very well survive and avoid the curse of every team that comes up to the Premier League going straight down. And they showed it here. A fairly solid defensive display, and they did manage to put 3, and that's going to be huge in a relegation battle. And I do expect them to still be in a relegation battle. I would say that it was a little bit messy football, but that home advantage seemed to play well. But let's talk about the real thing that we do need to discuss, which is West Ham. I tipped them to be the team that's going down, and I stuck my neck out, and I think Potter is going to be the first manager to get sacked. The feeling around them is very poor. They've lost one of their stars in Kudus to a rival in Spurs, and you get beaten 3-0 by the up-and-coming Championship side. It doesn't bode very well, in my opinion. Now, let's move on to my team, Spurs. So, a comprehensive 3-0 win. I felt like it was a good match. We still looked a little bit more open than I would like, but ultimately, Richarlison back on form is very, very positive, especially in the wake of Solanke having a little bit of an injury. We're still lacking that number 10, but it looks like Eze's on the horizon potentially. And I would say you can only beat what's in front of you. And I would say a solid performance. And I haven't been doing my ratings, so let me just go through the ratings so far. So for Liverpool, I gave them a 7 out of 10. For Bournemouth, this is the first week, so please forgive me. Bournemouth, I gave them a 6 out of 10. Positive despite losing. Aston Villa, I gave them a 5 out of 10. Didn't really move the needle much. Newcastle, I gave a 6 despite, because of their Isaac saga, managing to fight through a match like that. Quite impressive. Brighton, I gave a 5 out of 10. Again, didn't glean much from the match. Fulham, also a 5 out of 10 on a shared. Sunderland, I gave a 10 out of 10 performance. They are the best performers this week by far. West Ham, I gave a 1 out of 10. The worst performance by far. Spurs, I gave them an 8 out of 10. And talking about their opponents, let's talk about Burnley. Now, this was an away match. I don't expect Burnley expected to win matches like this, but I do think that they are going to struggle. Everyone has seemingly tipped them to go down 20th. I would say this match is a little bit positive. They did create chances. They didn't manage to put them away. Ultimately, I gave them a 4 out of 10. Not the worst thing you could be doing considering everything else that's been happening this season. Now, moving on, let's talk about Wolves. So, Wolves got a 4-0 beating. How much can we really glean from this? I'm not sure. They did lose one of their stars in Cunha. I do feel like they're going to struggle and be flirting with relegation. Ultimately, I gave them a 2 out of 10. They created a couple of chances, but ultimately was not a threat. Going on to the other end of the table in a challenger for the title, Man City. I gave them an 8 out of 10. Haaland, I think we've all forgotten that Haaland is probably the greatest striker we've ever seen, or at least goal scorer in the Premier League. And he continues to prove that. 2-0, 2 goals from him, 2-0 at half time. City on cruise control. Reinders looks dangerous. Cherky off the bench. City have quite a ridiculous attacking team right now. With potentially Rodri back on the horizon, I expect them to do very well this season. But they haven't been tested defensively yet, and I think that is where we'll see the making or breaking of them. Now, moving on to what we thought were going to be title challengers in Chelsea. Now, a 0-0 performance at home. It is the first game of the season. Maybe there's a bit of a hangover from the Cup World Cup or Club World Cup. But ultimately, a 0-0 at home is quite disappointing. With their acquisitions of João Pedro and Delap, we expect more goals from them. That was a problem last season. We'll see how they do going forwards, but I think they're going to be reliant on Cole Palmer hitting a hot streak again this season. I gave them ultimately a 4 out of 10. Now, this is going to be controversial, but let's talk about Crystal Palace. It looks like they're about to lose Eze. It looks like they might be losing Gehi. How are they going to cope with that? That's all on the horizon. I gave them an 8 out of 10 despite the 0-0 performance. I felt like they should have won that match. I felt like he did the free kick. It got disallowed quite controversially, I think. I think it's a shame that they didn't get Europa League. I think it's even more of a shame that they might be losing and having their team gutted. And I think they'll struggle. But with Glasner, I think they've got a really, really good manager. Potentially a tip to take Arteta's spot if Arteta isn't careful. But ultimately, an 8 out of 10. Disappointing result, but very good performance, and they continue to be on a hot streak. Moving on to a little bit of a surprise, Nottingham Forest. Nottingham Forest, picking up where they left off. We all expected them to struggle a lot, given how they've lost in Elanga, but Chris Wood proving that these seasons aren't a fluke, and scoring 2 goals. I would say very, very good performance, and I gave Nottingham Forest a 7 out of 10 for their performance. Lots of positives. Moving on to their opponents in Brentford. Like I mentioned in my predictions, I think Brentford are going to struggle this season. I gave them a 3 out of 10. They did manage to score a goal, but with the potential of losing Visser, already having lost Mbumo, who did look a bit dangerous, I think it's going to be a tough season for Brentford. Now, moving on to the big game of the week. Manchester United versus Arsenal. At Old Trafford, unfortunately for United, a loss at home, but a lot of positives. And I would say I mirrored the sentiment of a lot of fans. I feel like United performed very well. I gave them a 5 out of 10 because ultimately you guys did lose. But Mbumo looked dangerous on the right. Cunha's pace, I think, was electric during that game, and he found a lot of joy and was able to find those half spaces. But very, very good. Just needs an end product. Sesko is hopefully going to be that. Perhaps they're going to keep Højlund. We're not very sure. But I see goals in this team. They just need to put something on the end of it. Now let's talk about Arsenal. A lot has been made of their performance. Ultimately, 1-0 is a great performance away at Old Trafford. It's always difficult there. I've given them a 6 out of 10, and let me explain. I think a win away is important, but it has stirred the pot a little bit because it doesn't feel like they've progressed from last season. Julian, when we had a discussion about this, said that he feels that it was an 8 out of 10 amazing performance. I think that's overstating it quite a bit. It was not an amazing performance. And ultimately, Arsenal looked toothless. Credit to United, they managed to lock down Saka with Luke Shaw being back. They didn't create a lot of goal threat. And I think that's been one of the biggest problems with Arsenal. It's very boring to watch Arsenal play. I don't care what you feel. I don't care if you're an Arsenal fan and this hurts your feelings. You guys are boring to watch. It's like watching a very, very evolved Stoke City. That's the criticism. And I think that you can see there's a seed of truth in it. And if it riles you up, then you need to address it. Because clearly, there's a reason why this narrative is happening. Partly, it might be haters. But partly, I think it's because you guys are very boring to watch. Now, hopefully they turn it around for their sake, at least, in the next game. Hopefully, Gyökeres gets his first goal soon. Because I must say, he didn't seem that electric. His touch was a little bit off when watching the game. He didn't get a lot of service, to be fair to him. But he didn't create a lot of chances himself. And I think that's ultimately going to be quite a big sticking point. 6 out of 10. And then finally, the last match of the weekend, or the game week, Leeds versus Everton. Important for the teams who come up from the Championship to get points, especially at home. Doesn't matter how you get it. A debut goal for Imecha against Everton. I think Everton will be disappointed. I gave Leeds an 8 out of 10. Any relegated team getting points is a solid performance. I would say that. If you're in a relegation battle, all these points count very significantly. And for Everton, I feel like this was a bit of a stumbling block. Some good chances created, but losing. You guys are supposed to be transitioning. You've got potentially Grealish on the horizon. You've kept a lot of your solid defense. I gave them a 3 out of 10. So let me know what you thought about game week 1. Let me know what you expect going forwards. And look forward to hopefully my predictions by the end of the week. Catch you guys next time. Peace.